Hey Kyle, this is Joe Bolter.
Hey, Joe.
Did you take Mick's latest quiz?
I did not. No, not yet.
Okay, well, one of the questions on there was you see a young lady at a high school tournament, earbuds in, apparently in some kind of trance, playing something. What should you do? Do nothing, go ask a senior rules official for advice, or confront the person and ask them what they're listening to?
Mhm. What's the answer?
Well, he says confront them and ask them what they're listening to and clarify. I think I just ignore it.
Yeah, so we talked about that last week in terms of using artificial devices to block out distractions.
Right.
That's not allowed. So we would need to know what's going on in those headphones. If they were just listening to the news forecast and something casual, then it wouldn't be an issue. But if they were purposely trying to block out distractions from other people, or just
By using music?
puts them in a better mood. Those are all things that could be deemed giving them an advantage of blocking out distractions.
Mm-hmm. So you would ask them what they're doing.
Yeah, I would just say what's I would ask them what's what are you listening to?
If they're listening to music, they can do that through a remote speaker in their cart, but they can't do it with earbuds.
Well, it really all comes down to their intent, Joe, with it. So if their intent is to listen to music to block out distractions or to put them in a good mood, then we have an issue. If they're just doing it to have a good time, then it's something different. But typically in a competitive junior event, it's always going to be for a purpose. In a casual event that you and I go play and we, scratch and claw to break 90, it's probably not going to be something that we're really competitive about, or that we really care to block out something.
Okay.
I'm saying me, Brad. I'm not saying that.
The question is really twofold, isn't it? What are you listening to? And then more importantly, why are you listening to it?
Right. Yeah. I think that's the follow-up question is why.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have an answer. I'm listening to it because I don't want to hear my partners talking. Well, gee, I don't think that's allowed, right?
Right. Yep.
Got it.
It could be getting instruction from a coach as well.
Yeah, they could be listening to the latest, Claude Harmon podcast or Butch Harmon or whatever. So there's always
while you're making a stroke, you can't be listening to anything.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure. All right. So I think we'll go ahead and get started here. I think we might have a few more people join in. But first off, I just wanted to say thanks to Craig for doing this the last couple weeks. And I'm sure today will hopefully live up to the standards that he set. But we'll look forward to learning a few things. And as always, feel free to ask questions, whether it's over the Zoom call or via the chat, and we'll get to those. If we do have any background noise, we will mute you. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully we're all somewhat comfortable with Zoom and can unmute ourselves when we want to talk and keep ourselves muted when we're not. So if you need to learn how to do that, just hover over and it's in the bottom left, the mute button is. All right, so today we're going to talk about rules 7 and 8 and maybe 9. Who knows, maybe 10. But when we're looking through the rule book, this section of rules 7 to 11 is called playing the ball. So we're talking about players' actions or the side's actions when trying to hit the shot or getting ready to hit the shot. So for Rule 7 and for all these rules, we've I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. So in the rules, when they're rewritten, there is a purpose statement that really gives a good baseline understanding of what's covered in each rule. And so I think it's always good to understand at a high level what we're gonna read. And they do a good job of pointing out key principles, which we'll talk about a few here in the rules we covered today about, playing the course as you find it, and playing the ball as it lies, being two central tenets to the rules and how they're written. So Rule 7 allows the player, so Rule 7, ball search, finding and identifying the ball. Rule 7 allows the player to take reasonable actions to fairly search for his or her ball and play after each stroke. But the player still must be careful, as a penalty will apply if the player acts excessively and causes improvement to the conditions affecting his or her next stroke. And the player gets no penalty if the ball is accidentally moved in trying to find or identify it, but then must replace the ball in its original spot. So when we talk about the term improving, we talk about improving conditions affecting the stroke. The definition of improve is to alter one or more of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play so the player gains a potential advantage for a stroke. Another way to think about it is that the definition of improve is to pull a Patrick Reed. So if you're ever thinking about what you need to do, just think about what he does, and that'll get you in the right frame. Again, I'm the biggest fan of Patrick Reed, and I promise I won't mention him more than 10 times today. But and the other thing that you'll hear about when we talk, or that you might hear when people talk, is this term CATS, and that's just a shorthand for conditions affecting the stroke. So if you see that in rules channels or Facebook groups or quizzes, that's what they're talking about when they say CATS. All right, so the definition for conditions affecting the stroke, it's the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of intended stance, the area of intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place the ball. So all those things are a factor. And the area of intended stance includes both where the player will place his or her feet and the entire area that might reasonably affect how and when the player's body is positioned in preparing for and making the intended stroke. And the area of intended swing includes the entire area that might reasonably affect any part of the backswing, the downswing, or the completion of the swing for the intended stroke. So again, we're talking in both cases here, this term reasonably. So it's not necessarily a quote unquote exact defined area like we have when we talk about a relief area that is defined. This is
Now I'm not getting
estimated.
anything.
Right. And then each of the terms lie, line of play, and relief area has its own definition. All right, so how to fairly search for the ball, right? A player can take reasonable actions to find and identify the ball. Player is responsible for finding their ball, and in doing so, they can fairly search for the ball. So some of the things they can do, they can move sand and water. They can move or bend grass, bushes, tree branches, or other growing or attached natural objects. And also breaking objects, but only if such breaking is a result of other reasonable actions taken to find or identify the ball. So if taking such reasonable actions as part of fair search improves the conditions affecting the stroke, there is no penalty if it results from a fair search. But if the improvement results from actions that exceeded what was reasonable, the player gets the general penalty. So a good kind of example of this is if you're going into a bush to look for your ball, you can, move your hands around and reasonably move things to try to find it. But you can't go in like a bull and just break everything, or think to yourself, hey, I'm going to go through and just start hacking in here, because if I do find my ball, it'll be easier to play after. So again, we're talking about fairly searching. So if when the USGA, they can't, or they don't define what is fair, but in the interpretations 7(1)(a)(1), they define what is not fair. So we can guess at what is fair by knowing what's not fair. So that's on page 109. And if you want to do some further studying, I'd recommend reading that. As it really it gives a few examples of actions that are unlikely to be considered reasonable. Okay, so one of the things we can do is we can move sand. So I'm sure a lot of you have run into this situation before where you might
Hey,
be out.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Excuse
Mhm.
me. One question on searching for the ball before we leave that topic.
Sure.
Does the player have to search for the ball? The reason I ask that is, say he mails one into the thick woods. I mean, it's gone. And then his next ball is in the middle of the fairway, and we're out there, say, on a trouble hole, and we're always enthusiastic, trying to help these players move along and looking for balls.
Sure.
Should we wait for the player to confirm with him that he's searching for his ball before we find it?
Yeah, that's a great question, great example where in that case, it would be the best way to approach that is to wait until the player gets there and ask them if they want you to search for the ball, because the player is not obligated to search for the ball. If they hit it, like in your example, deep into the crap, and then they hit a nice one down the middle for their provisional, they may just want to play that one and not worry about it, because as I think as you and others know on the call, is that if they do find that original ball, they have to proceed with that one, and the provisional is null and void.
Exactly.
So,
that's my point. And what
Yep.
comes to mind is a PGA event where an enthusiastic volunteer found Phil Mickelson's ball, and he was pissed because
Right.
of my example. He nailed it deep into the junk, and then he had a nice one out in the middle of the fairway, and the volunteer found it, and he was not happy.
Yeah. That was back in the pre thumbs up days for Phil. But you're right. Yeah. So I think it happened at Torrey Pines. He hit it down on the beach, and his provisional is right down the middle. So yeah. So there's always. I mean, I think that's always a good rule of thumb, is to wait until the player starts searching. Typically I forget, someone told me this, but maybe it was Jean, who told me that, she never goes in, or they never go into an area of thick bushes unless the player does, because they're not going to get scratched up unless the player is willing to go get scratched up with them. So I think it's always a good idea to just wait until, the player gives you permission. Obviously, there's going to be certain cases where they're going to want to search for it, and you can start ahead of time. You don't always have to wait. But if there's ever a situation where you think, man, like maybe that provisional will be better, then it's probably best to wait. But that doesn't stop their fellow competitors or their other players in the group or their opponent in match play from going to try and find it, because
Right.
they can go find it, and you might deal with that with some parents that hate each other. Their kids are playing together. They might go try to find balls that shouldn't be found. So
Yeah.
I-
Okay.
I was in a situation where a player hit a ball into the woods. I was playing, not refereeing, and did not hit a provisional, just said, I'm putting another ball in play. Okay, so that's her ball in play. When we got there, the person being the rules official insisted that she play the first ball. And evidently she didn't know enough to counteract him and ask him to call in. And she ended up playing the first ball, which turned out okay for her. But, you know, that was a referee mistake that time.
Right. Yes.
Sometimes we have volunteers than actual referees at some of the women's events, some of the senior women's events, shall I say. And
The rest of that is if you're in there searching, when the player's done, you're done, and so are all the volunteers. You get them out of there. Player's discretion how long to look.
Yeah, that's a good point, Marv. And I think the other thing to add to that too is that, I mean, the same thing kind of goes when you get to, you know, timing after that 3 minutes. You know, it's best to just tell people to stop searching, because if they find it, it's, you know, it doesn't matter. And usually you're going to get that complaining spectator or player that, hey, I found this, but then you have to explain to everyone that it was within 3 minutes or wasn't within 3 minutes. So yeah, that's a good point. And then Sue, yeah, to your point, to your example, because the player did not say that they were hitting a provisional, that ball that in play was a ball in play. But as you correctly said, if the official tells them one thing and it's not correct, in that situation, they were dissolved from penalty there.
Kyle, what would you do? So let's say you're in a trouble spot. You actually see the ball. You have eyes on it. The player, you know, it's in the trees or whatever, doesn't want to look for it. Do you ignore it, or kind of go, okay, you don't want to look for it, it's right there, but you know, I mean, because once it's identified, they have the responsibility to see if it's their ball.
Correct. Yeah. So that's exactly right. That last point there is once a ball's been identified or has been identified, they need to look to see if it's there. So that would go for you as a rules referee as well. If you see a ball, you need to identify it.
Kyle, I guess I'm mixed up. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do we have spotters or four caddies out there for them if they're not supposed to look for the ball until the player tells them to?
No, I think we're not saying that. I think we're just saying that if player says to search, then we obviously want to help them search for the ball. I think Leroy just brought up a situation where the player might not want to look for the ball, and so we shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I think I read a chat where a referee told the parents not to look for the player's ball till the player got there. I don't think that's right. I think if you know where a ball is, I think you have the obligation to tell players if it's in bounds that they got to play that ball. And I think if they don't come and identify it, they could be DQ'd. So I think we're taking away from our referees, our volunteers, our four caddies if we tell them not to look for a ball. That's not correct.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Nick. Yeah, I mean they definitely can and should look for balls, but again, I guess it just comes down to if there's a situation where it's really deep in the woods, you know, you might just have them wait until.
You know, if a player doesn't want to look for his ball, he doesn't hit a provisional. He just hits a ball without saying anything. And then if he's smart enough to tell somebody that, hey, that ball is not my ball. I played another ball and I'm laying 3 here or whatever. It's not that hard, folks.
Yeah. Well, okay. Sounds good, Nick.
This is Chris. I hate to belabor this point, but if the ref says that you must play the original ball when you know that the second ball you hit, because you did not say provisional, does that rules official overrule you?
So in that case, as a player,
Pardon?
sorry, there's a lot of feedback. If you could please mute yourself. I can't even hear myself talk. Thank you. So to answer your question, as a player, where is Marv? All right. Here we go. Okay. So as a player, whatever. As a player, in that case, you can always ask for a second opinion. So if you don't think that the official is correct, you can always ask for a second opinion. So we would that's always an option, Chris.
And then the rules official refuses to give you a second opinion, so you're only now you're down to playing a second ball in stroke play.
Correct. Yeah, you could play two balls and say that I don't want to disrespect you. I'm going to play two balls because I really think that what I'm doing is right and what you're telling me to do is not correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So going back to the situation, we have a ball that's lost in sand. We have all run into the situation, most of us have, where you know a ball went into the bunker, you heard it, you saw it, but it's plugged in the sand because it's a thick layer of sand. And so when you do that, you can obviously move the sand to find it. But when you do find it, you need to recreate the original lie as close as possible. But in the case of a ball being completely buried by sand, you can leave a small part of the ball visible for the player to play it. So I think that tends to happen, at least once or twice a year. All right, how to identify a ball. So I think most of us are up to speed on how this process works because of the recent Patrick Reed scenario. So, I mean, Patrick did pretty much everything correctly in terms of identifying his golf ball. He, put a mark down. He picked it up. I mean, I guess in his case, he was trying to see if it was embedded, but it could be the same thing if you're trying to just to see if it was yours. Maybe there's a mark on it or whatever, but basically anytime you do identify, you can do it in all these ways listed on the screen here. But the player can always mark their ball to lift to identify it. It just has to be careful that there is an actual reason to do it. So if you have your unique identifying mark on the top of the ball and you know it's yours, you can't claim that you're lifting your ball to identify it in that case, because it's clearly identified without having to lift it. Okay, and then just like to check and see if it's embedded, when you check to identify it previously, pre-2019, you had to announce that you were doing it. Now you don't need to. But as it says here on the fourth part, if the player lifts his or her ball under this rule when not reasonably necessary to identify it, except on the putting green, because on the putting green we can always lift it if we mark it. And then if they fail to mark it or they clean it when they're not allowed, the player gets a one-stroke penalty. Okay, so the key here is that they need to mark it. So you'll see a lot of this if you're looking for balls in like tall heather grass. You'll see you need to identify a ball to see if it's yours. They do need to put a mark down. If they don't, then we're going to have an issue there. They don't put a mark down. So make sure they're marking it with a T when we run into these scenarios. Another thing that you'll see in this rule, and you'll see in every rule, are these exceptions. So a good way to kind of think about how the exceptions work, that's always been explained to me, is that we outline a general principle of rules or general rules, but the exception or the specific always governs the general. So there are always going to be these exceptions, and in some cases you'll see it's kind of excessive, but they do happen quite a bit. If you think about it, there's going to be these exceptions that always are going to govern or overrule the specific rule when we're talking about exceptions. Just like marking or identifying our ball, we can always do it on the putting green because we can always mark our ball on the green. There's no rule against that. And then you'll see too in some of these penalty statements, so in the red here, you'll see on the screen, there's a lot of these where they talk about if you do one thing, you won't get a penalty under the rule that we're talking about. This is what is commonly referred to as like a quantity discount, or 2 + 2 or 2 + 1 = 2. So basically what it's saying here is that if you do something else incorrectly, like play from a wrong place, and you lift your ball without or you lift your ball and don't mark it, you're not going to get a 2 + 1 stroke penalty. You're just going to get a total of 2 penalty strokes for that. Okay, so you'll see that these kind of references frequently throughout the rule book. So when you do think about that, just think about those as the quote unquote quantity discounts. And again, all that kind of ties back to this last statement here, which Craig talked about, where we have those multiple rules breaches that result from either a single act or related acts or separate acts, and how the penalty structure works there. All right, so if we're searching for our ball and we're trying to identify it and we accidentally move the ball, there's going to be no penalty. All right, so whether that's moved by the player, the opponent, or anyone else, there's going to be no penalty, and we're just going to put it back. Okay, that's a change from since starting in 2019. And the other change that I think most of us understand now too is that we run into situations where the ball accidentally moves and we don't know its original spot. Now we're going to estimate it and we're going to place it. And so keep in mind that's a place now, not a drop. So the most common example of that happens is when we're out riding around, or players are out riding around looking for their ball in the rough with their carts, and they all of a sudden they find it because they pop and run it over, and the ball pops up and it trundles somewhere. You know, we don't know the exact spot in that rough where it was, so we're going to guess and estimate, and then we're going to place it there. And then, as it says here, if the ball is on, under, or against any immovable obstruction, integral object, boundary object, growing or attached natural object, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, on or under, against these objects. And then if we don't put it back in the right spot, then we're going to get a general penalty, a 2-stroke penalty, or loss of hole in match play for this. All right, any questions about Rule 7 before we move on? Okay. Oh.
I have a question. If
Yeah.
if a guy's driving in a cart and they're looking for his ball and he drives over it, then they come around to find it, is there any penalty for that? And can he, having driven over it, he's pushed it in the ground, can he bring it up and replace it?
Sure. Yep. So as long as that action of driving over the ball is related to them searching for the ball, then there's going to be no penalty. And then in either scenario, whether they're searching or not searching for it, the player would be entitled to put the ball in the nearest, most similar spot in that case if it got embedded or pushed into the ground. And it's going to be the nearest spot within one club length of where that spot was, but as close as possible, but not exceeding that one club length. So in most cases, it's going to be like an inch or two over from that spot.
Hey, thanks,
Kyle,
Tom.
this is Bill. Is the ball, in that case, is the ball dropped or is the ball placed?
Yep. So anytime now, yep, it's placed. Anytime now we're estimating the spot, or we're putting that back. Like in this case, we're moving it over an inch. It's going to be a place.
Place. Thank you.
Yep.
Kyle, this is Jeff.
Yeah.
One quick question before we move on. What is considered reasonable? Because I see that in Rule 7 quite a bit. And what is considered unreasonable? For instance, ball search. For instance, let's just say it's in the rough. We know it's in the rough, but it's deep. And the player can use his feet to kind of locate the ball. Can he use his golf club in a swinging motion to locate the ball?
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. I think when we get to the reasonable versus non-reasonable, we're talking about like the intensity of the action. So whether we're lightly brushing the club, moving it in the rough versus hacking it, that's
Okay.
reasonable versus unreasonable.
Okay.
But there's a good example of what's fair or what's not fair on page 109 in the official.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah. Okay.
And then Sue, you had the point here in the chat. That's correct, that the rules official or referee needs to determine whether if we're talking about that provisional, what was said, what wasn't said before we can move forward with that. So that is 100% correct there. All right, Rule 8. So Rule 8, play the course played as it is found. And one of the central principles of the game and of the rules when they were written is to play the course as you find it. When the player's ball comes to rest, he or she normally has to accept the conditions affecting the stroke and not improve them before playing the ball. However, a player may take certain reasonable actions, even if they improve those conditions. And there are limited circumstances where the conditions may be restored without penalty after they have been improved or worsened. All right, so actions that improve the conditions affecting the stroke. So to support the principle of play the course you find it, this rule restricts what a player may do to improve any of these protected conditions affecting the stroke anywhere on or off the course for the next stroke the player will make. The lie of the player's ball, the area of the player's stance, the area of the player's intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place the ball. Okay, and this does not apply to the removal of loose impediments or removal of obstructions, which is allowed up to a certain extent, which is provided in Rule 15. And then if the ball is in action or in motion, Rules 11 covers that. Okay, and then we're also, another key thing I missed over here is that this rule applies to actions taken both during a round and while play is stopped as well. So if we're suspended, Lee will run us through that next week in terms of how play is suspended, how that works. But if a play is suspended, these actions that improve the conditions affecting our stroke would also apply. Okay, so actions that are allowed. Okay, so except in the limited ways, a player must not take any of these actions if they improve the condition of stroke. So they can't move, bend, or break any growing or attached natural object, move a movable obstruction, an integral object or a boundary object, move a tee marker from the teen area when playing a ball from that teen area. It's different if you top one off the tee to the next teen area, you can move that, but the tee marker from the teen area that you're playing from cannot be moved. Cannot move a loose impediment or move obstruction in a position to build a stance or improve the line of play. Cannot alter the surface of the ground, including by replacing divots in a divot hole, removing or pressing down divots that have already been replaced or other cut turf that is already in place, or creating or eliminating holes, indentations, or uneven surfaces. So a common example of that we run into quite a bit here in Michigan, especially early in the season, are pitch marks. So we got to be very careful with players and them patting down those pitch marks, because if they are in the area of their intended swing or stance, and those are things that cannot be improved. So it's really important that players know that. And that also comes into effect when you're giving a player an embedded ball relief as well. Now that they get a little bit more distance from that pitch mark, it's usually not an issue, but it can be. So just keep that in mind if you're helping a player now out in that scenario. You want to make sure you tell them to not tap that down unless it's completely out of their way and won't impact their next shot.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
The pitch mark issue really is not an issue. It's not really in your relief area. And once you pick up your ball, you haven't established a line of play yet. So you've got to be careful about not allowing them to maintain the course by fixing a pitch mark.
So you're talking about like if the ball is embedded?
You talking about pitch mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, embedded ball is pitch mark. Yeah. The pitch mark itself is not in your relief area. The relief point is behind the pitch mark, correct?
Correct.
And then once you pick up your ball, you have not established a line of play yet. So you're not correcting a line of play or necessarily a stance, because that hasn't been established yet.
Okay, I'll have to. Yeah, I mean that sounds right. So basically, you're saying like the same thing as that. Like if I'm dropping a ball in any relief area, if I see there's a divot, I can replace the divot before I drop it. Is that kind of the same thing that you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying if a person declares that they want to repair the pitch mark to maintain the course, after they've already picked up their ball, then I would not have a problem with that.
Okay, I would need to look a little bit more, because I still think that there might be an issue there. Okay. But I guess what I'm trying, or what the point of bringing up the pitch mark is that a lot of times what happens is it'll hit like in the fringe and it will spin back, and that pitch mark will be in their line of play. But that pitch mark will still be on the fringe, and a lot of times people think that they can tap that down, but since that pitch mark is not on the green, they cannot tap that down. In other cases, the ball might spin back a couple inches, and that pitch mark might be right in front of where they play, and again, they can't tap that down.
I agree with you in that scenario. I'm talking about in a scenario where you're actually taking relief on a pitch mark. From an embedded ball. In the case you're describing, yeah, I would agree with you. That would be affecting your line of play, so you would not allow a player to repair that pitch mark.
Yeah.
Kyle, the interpretation 8.1A/2 on page 115 allows, that's one of the exceptions, that a player can repair a pitch mark if it doesn't going to improve his line of play, if it's not close to it.
Right. Yep.
Couple of situations there.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. And a lot of times it's not going to be, impacting your play. It might be a club length or two out of the way, and you can definitely tap those down. And the question was asked too, is after you play, if you can tap it down or fix those. Obviously, yes. I mean, any after the fact, we encourage players to tap those down after they play. And if there's a case where they're not sure if it may or may not be in their way, or might be something, a condition that might affect their stroke, then it's best just to have them wait and then to tap it down after the fact.
Carl,
Yeah.
the other thing on the page that we're on there, isn't it on items 1 and 2, those things can be corrected. 3, 4, and 5 cannot be corrected without penalty.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So if you alter the surface of the ground, remove sand or loose soil, or remove dew or frost, you cannot fix those. The ones, like you said, in 1 and 2, those in certain cases can be reversed and a penalty not be applied. Okay, and then the other thing too, we talked about this a little bit with the pitch mark, but when we're talking about loose sand and soil as well, keep in mind that sand and loose soil is treated differently on the putting green as it is compared to the fringe. So players can brush that off the putting green, but not the fringe. And so a lot of times people just think if they have their putter in their hand, they can do certain things. Well, it depends on where their ball is in that case. So just always something to keep in mind, especially on areas and fringes where they're surrounded by bunkers. We definitely do tend to see a lot of sand accumulate in those areas.
Kyle?
Yes.
Go over divots caused by practice swings and when you cannot replace them. See it a lot in the high school tournaments, and I'm always a little bit confused, but that's nothing new.
Well, you said it 4 out of 10. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so the question is a good question in terms of practice swings and divots. Again, it's kind of the same thing, is that if the divot is in an area in one of these positions that might impact your next stroke, whether it's your area of your intended swing or your stance, then obviously we're not going to be able to fix, or we're not going to be able to replace that. But if it's out of the way or we're doing it solely, there's a note here that we'll see in a little bit. If we're doing it solely for the care of the course, then there'd be no penalty for that. Does that help, Mike?
Somewhat. So if she's taking a practice swing, and when they wait a lot, they like to take practice swings, and there's 3 or 4 divots she's placed in front of her line. A couple of them are in her line of play, and there might be a little bit of grass on the ball, which obviously you can't do anything about. So are they allowed to replace all of those, or just once again, it's if they're in the line of play, no? If they're not in the line of play, yes?
So in terms of, I think the question is more like, so I guess, and someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but in terms of taking that divot and replacing it, if it impacts your next stroke, that's a no. But that divot is now loose and a loose impediment. So if it was in their line of play ahead of them, they could move that out of the way. But they might not always be able to go and replace their divot. If it was really close to their ball, it might impact their swing or something like that.
think it kind of depends on how the shot they're gonna make. You know, if they're gonna try to dribble one across, then it's different. If it's 250 yards, they're gonna put the ball in the air, no
Yeah.
big problem.
Right, yep, that's a good point. All right, actions that are allowed. So in preparing for or making a stroke, the player may take any of these actions and there is no penalty, even if doing so improves the conditions affecting the stroke. So we talked about fairly searching for the ball. Again, as long as they're reasonable or to identify it. Reasonable actions to remove loose impediments and movable obstructions. Taking reasonable actions to mark the spot of the ball and to lift it and replace it under a rule, or to ground the club lightly right in front or right behind the ball. And we kind of talked about this last week, or I think it was last week or maybe it was the week before, about waist areas and how that's allowed there to be able to touch the ground lightly behind it there. But this does not allow for pressing the club on the ground or when a ball is in the bunker, touching the sand right in front of or behind the ball. Okay, so there's those exceptions there in the bunker. When the ball's in the bunker, we can't ground our club. I think we all know that. And then we can't push down or pull a Patrick Reed. I mean, just kidding, but we can't push down to make the shot easier. You see that happen a lot in tall rough. So just be cognizant of people taking certain actions in the deep rough. That's not allowed. And then they can also, though, they can firmly place their feet and take in a stance. So they can take a stance, and there is a reasonable amount of digging in that is allowed. And I think we all see this when people take bunker shots. Some of them like to do a little shake to get in there, and they get their feet a little settled in. But they can't purposely move the sand to help build a stance. In that case.
I have a question, Kyle.
Yeah, sure.
I'm new to the official game here, and for all my golfing life, I have treated pine straw as a loose impediment. In other words, I'll move the pine straw as necessary to get a stable stance. Have I been in violation all my life?
Nope. So pine straw is loose impediment, so you can definitely move that. That's not a problem. Especially when it comes to stance, it's not a problem at all. Just the only thing is when it's around the ball, you just got to be careful because obviously if the ball moves, then we're going to have an issue.
Right.
But yep.
Okay. Good.
Good question. Glad you haven't been breaking the rules all your life like me. So that's how we learn. All right, so we can also fairly take our stance by taking reasonable actions to get to the ball. But when we're doing so, we're not entitled to a normal stance or swing, and we must use the least intrusive course of action to deal with the particular situation. So I think most of you have heard either Gene or myself say this, but a lot of times what players will ask us if they're in a situation where they're not sure. Typically, a good rule of thumb is to have the player keep their hands on the club so that they can't use their hands to do anything that might be not allowed. But if you really think about it, if you have a player that's trying to get underneath a tree or in a bush and they need to do this quote unquote least intrusive course of action, if you think about it from the perspective, there's 4 ways, front, back, left, and right, to get into any kind of stance that you're at. So the player and or you need to determine which angle is going to be the least intrusive for that player to approach it. And in that case, there could be a scenario where you break some branches, you push some stuff back, but you are entitled to get into that position. You're not, like it says, you're not entitled to a normal stance or swing, but you are entitled to at least make an effort to get in there. And then if you make a stroke or on the backswing of a stroke, of which is made, there's no issue as well. So another thing too is if you have a player that's underneath the trees, and you'll see this sometimes too, where the player will take their backswing and then you'll hear a crack, crack. In that case, we always recommend that the player finish their swing, because if they crack, crack on the way back and they finish and make the stroke, there's no issue. But if they crack, crack and they break something and it does impact their next shot or gives them an advantage, and they're going to get a penalty for that. All right. And then there is that exception about the sand. Obviously, in the backswing, we cannot touch the sand. In the bunker, okay, so then we're going to move to the teen area here. So in a teen area, you can place a tee in or on the ground. You can move or break anything growing or attached. And you can also alter the surface of the ground, remove or press down sand or soil, remove dew, frost, or water. So you'll see this a lot of people do this. They'll take their club and they like hit the ground to pop it up, like on the teeing pad for par 3 or whatever. A lot of people, I didn't say a lot, but a decent amount of people do that. That's okay, because it's in the teen area. But obviously we couldn't do that same thing in the fairway. And then one of the things we talked about already too is we had not talked about this. In a bunker, we can always smooth sand to care for the course after the ball has been played from the bunker. Okay. So if the ball goes out of the bunker, we can always smooth that soil or smooth that sand. And we talked about on the putting green, we can remove sand and loose soil and repair damage. Okay, but it has to be on the putting green. If that damage or sand or loose soil is on the fringe, we cannot move that. And we can also move a natural object to see if it's loose or not, or if it's attached. But if the object is found to be growing or attached, it must stay attached and be returned as nearly as possible to its original position. Okay, so as Lee mentioned earlier, there is a way to avoid penalty in certain cases if we can restore the conditions. In some cases, we cannot restore no matter what we do. And then there's other cases where there's possibility of restoring, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that we're going to avoid penalty. So if the player can eliminate the improvement by restoring the original conditions in the ways allowed that we'll talk about in a little bit. However, if the player improves the conditions affecting the stroke by taking any of the actions covered, they cannot avoid penalty. So as Lee was saying earlier, those that are listed in 8.1A, 3, and 5. So if we alter the ground, we remove sand or loose soil, or we remove dew or frost, we cannot undo those. Those are going to be automatic penalties. Okay, so
Kyle,
yeah.
Kyle, Steve, I'm sorry to go back, but where the player can clean up the mess that they've made in the bunker, tend to the bunker, it doesn't matter where the ball goes as long as it goes outside of the bunker. In other words, it goes out of bounds. There's out of bounds behind the green. So they know they're going to have to come back and play it from the bunker. They can, because it has gone out of the bunker, they can clear that area up and rake that. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that is correct. That's
okay.
Good.
Sorry I waited so long. I apologize.
No, that's a good question, because it can definitely happen. And yeah, anytime it leaves the bunker, they can always rake that area.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see. So there was a question about breaking a branch. If it's in the teen area, that's allowed. However, if it's not in the teen area, then we would not be able to break that branch if it is impacting our conditions affecting the stroke, our line of play, our area of intended swing, which would be the most common scenario. So yeah, if that tree branch is not in the teen area, you cannot break that. Then when do you assess the penalty for someone who taps down the divot that interferes with their line of putt on the fringe? So in that case, it's a good question. We would want to let the player know as soon as possible in that case, as it's not a severe penalty per se, like a DQ, but we would want to let the player know. If you could do it before they play their next shot, that'd be great. But it might be something that you tell the player as they're walking off the green to the next tee as well. It really would just depend on the scenario, but you definitely want to let them know before they tee off on the next hole in that case.
Well, match play, it's loss of hole.
Correct. In match play, it's loss of hole. So yeah, you would act on it right away. I always assume stroke play, but I appreciate you keeping on top of me. It's good. It's good.
It's not so much that I've had that happen in a match I was refereeing with Joey Garber and Jimmy Dooling, so I'm familiar with the problem.
Yeah. Who was hopefully it wasn't the 18th hole or anything like that, but
no, it wasn't, but it was enough to cause some consternation on Garber's part on the next tee.
Right. Sounds like you made a friend for life. All right.
He knows who I am. I know that. But Dooling likes me.
Right. Hey, you gotta pick and choose. Pick and choose. So, all right. And then the other question was, what if it's another part of the bunker? So that's a good question, Steve. So if I hit it in the same bunker, but it's 30 yards ahead, I can clean up that area just because I'm doing it to care for the course. So in that case, I can definitely rake that and clean it up. The only issue we have with raking if the ball stays in the bunker is if that raking could impact the stance, the swing of the next stroke. All right, so how do we potentially avoid penalty by restoring conditions? So before making the stroke, the player may avoid penalty by restoring the original object as nearly as possible to its original position so that the improvement created by the branch is eliminated, I think it's supposed to say the breach, is eliminated. Such as by replacing a boundary object, such as a boundary stake that had been removed, removing the boundary object back into its original position. So I think most of us know with out of bounds stakes, we cannot move those or any boundary stake. But if we did move it, we could avoid penalty by putting it back where it was, provided that it can get put back. Okay, and then same thing about returning. So you might have a golfer do a swing move and pull some branches back. But if they just back out and then take their stance normally without moving all that stuff and nothing breaks or nothing significant breaks off of it, they can step back in and take their stance and avoid a penalty for that. Okay, but the player cannot avoid penalty if the improvement is not eliminated, such as when the boundary stake or branch has been bent or broken in a significant way so that it cannot be returned to its original position. So if I break off a branch, which says down here, I can't carry it on duct tape with me in my bag and duct tape the branch back here and be all good. If the damage is significant, I'm not going to be able to get that back. Okay, and then it also says that I can't use a different object. So if I I can't put a different stake in there. It's got to be the same one, or I can't put a different. I guess that's probably the best example of that. So there was a question that came to, about the birdhouse. I don't remember that scenario. I think what if I, so I don't know, Steve.
Kyle,
Yeah.
The player's caddy went forward and removed the birdhouse, but it was determined to be an integral object. So he was penalized.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep.
First lake, fourth hole.
Yep. Yeah. So in this case, Dan and Steve, I think what you're talking about is that so that player, because it was an integral object, it cannot be removed. And so they were penalized. However, if it would have been a movable obstruction, like what we see commonly, and maybe not the birdhouse, but like a 150 pole, those can be moved if they are in our way. But sometimes the course or the committee can determine something a integral object, which means that there's no relief, no free relief, and that it cannot be removed. So a lot of times, we don't do that a ton, but there are some scenarios where we do. I think Marv mentioned maybe one, but it could also be with a lot of times you'll see like rock walls. We have a few courses that have rock walls that we deem as integral objects that you do not get free relief from. Okay, and then number 2 is how to restore conditions improved by moving the object into position. Before making the stroke, the player may avoid penalty for breach of rule 8.1A2 by removing the object that was moved into position. Okay, so those are a couple of examples that we talk about where we can avoid those penalties. But again, it's only, if we go back to 8.1A, it's only areas or points 1 and 2 that we can do to avoid penalty. When if we do things in 3 to 5 there, we're not going to be able to avoid penalty. It's going to be an automatic penalty. All right, so what happens if conditions were worsened after the ball came to rest? So we talked about this a little bit already in terms of the ball that was run over by the cart. That's one example of this happening. That's probably the most common example of it happening. But again, if the conditions were worsened after the ball came to rest, the player is entitled to that original condition. So we're going to restore that condition as nearly as possible. In some cases, it might not be possible, like that ball that was run over by the cart. So then we're going to get it in the spot. That's that third point there. We're going to lift it, replace it, and we're going to place it on the nearest spot, not near the hole, that has the most similar conditions affecting the stroke and is within 1 club length of the original spot and is in the same area of the course as that spot. All right. Let's see here. And then if there's an exception in here, it talks about if the live ball is worsened when or after a ball is lifted or moved or before it has been replaced, it's covered in Rule 14.2 unless the lie was worsened when play was stopped and the ball was lifted, in which case this rule applies. So we have kind of the same, concept here where if during the delay, if the ball or the lie was worsened by something not natural, we would be able to fix it. So if we left our ball out there or the lawnmower ran it over and it had a cut in it, we could fix that before we go out to resume play in that scenario. Okay, if when we cannot restore worsened conditions, so if the conditions affecting the stroke are worsened by the player or by a natural object or by natural forces such as wind as water, the player must not improve those worsened conditions in breach of 8.1a. So basically, an example of that could be that, you know, let's just use the example of a delay where we might have a perfectly dry lie, but then the next morning or 2 hours later after we come back, there could be a little water, maybe not enough to be temporary water, but we're not, in that scenario, we're not going to be allowed to move the ball or put it in a condition that has no water, because that occurrence was completely natural and not by any person. The other common scenario that you'll have with this is a lot of times if you're dealing with a ruling in a bunker and you have the players walking around and making footprints and moving sand in the bunker, if it's the player, the player cannot fix his or her footprints. So when you're dealing with that or dealing with the ruling in the bunker, it's always good to like let the player know that be careful how much you move around because you're not going to be able to fix or rake that before you play. And it's best to always keep as many people out of the bunker as possible when you're doing that. There are the exceptions, obviously, if you're, you know, if people are searching for the ball, there are certain exceptions, but that's a common one that I at least run into when we're talking about this.
Kyle.
Number 2 here. Yeah.
Kyle, is Steve. I think Mick helped me on this once, but I'm not sure if this applies. And I'm trying to remember what was right or wrong, but it happened to be match play. I happened to be up by the green. Player's ball comes to rest on the fringe where he could get his putter to it, no problem if he chose to. The next player hits and leaves a ball mark right on his line. The opponent's ball spins out of the way, but now there's a ball mark right in front of his line there. Is that a worsened condition?
Yeah.
Is he entitled to what was there prior to that shot?
Yeah, so that would be an example of the number 1 here, where it happens by another person, not the player or his caddy. So in that case, he'd be able to fix that pitch mark and have the condition that he had before or when his ball came to rest.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
The same would be true if it were somebody hit a ball out of a bunker and covered the ball at rest with sand and changed his line of play there as well, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Could I go back to worsened condition for a moment?
Sure.
If play is stopped, suspended, say for a storm, and the player leaves their ball on the course, on the fairway, let's say, and during the course of that, say an hour and a half that play is suspended, wind comes up, rain comes up, and it blows down branches and debris in front of the ball. Then play is allowed to resume. Can the player remove that debris and the branch as a movable obstruction, or do they have to leave it in place?
So it wouldn't be a movable obstruction, but it could be a loose impediment. So a lot of it would depend on how it's attached or not. So a common example, maybe not super common, but one that comes up is you might have a tree that falls down in the middle of the fairway, and quote unquote, it's a loose impediment, but we all know no one's moving it. So in that case, the committee would probably make that area ground under repair, and players would be able to get relief in that case. But if it was a branch that could be easily removed, it's just a loose impediment, you can pull that out. But if it's something worse than that, then that would be something that we would want to know about as a committee, and we'd probably make it ground and repair.
Okay, okay, great, thank you.
Kyle,
Mhm.
all this kind of stuff is covered in the interpretations, right? 8.1D2/1 talks about examples of when restoration is not allowed include when a branch falls from a tree and alters the lie of the player's ball or the area of his or her stance or swing without causing the ball to move.
Right, yep.
So right now, when play is suspended, it's a little bit more complex, right? Because you're allowed to lift your ball, in which case you would be able to move a loose impediment if it wouldn't cause your ball to move when you moved it. So, but there's several of these interpretations in here that help to walk through these kind of scenarios.
Right. Yep. No, that's a good point. That's a lot of these things that we run into, or that happen a lot. Most of them are documented in these interpretations. That's exactly kind of what they're about. They're about these scenarios that happen, and so they have a way to bring them up and to make them known to us as rules referees. I'm sure the next time they print the book, there'll be a few more interpretations in there about some situations that have happened in the last couple of years, for sure. All right, and then the last part here on this one is we talk about team play. So in foursomes, either partner may act for the side, and action of the partner is treated by actions of the player. Okay, so keep that in mind if you're at team events, and act by the side in this case, in terms of this rule, is going to be determined to be the act of the player. So for example, if I'm playing a 4-ball and I already blew 2 out of bounds, so I'm out of the hole, I can't, just say, well, I'm out of the hole, I'll go and break that branch for you, Bill. So you got a clear shot, right? It's going to be a penalty if I do that. So just always keep in mind when you're dealing with team events that the side matters in some cases. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that the caddy, they're going to be responsible for players' actions for this as well. So just because the player doesn't break the branch, if the caddy does, the player is responsible for that as well. All right, rule 8.2. So now we're moving into deliberate actions. Okay, so before we were really talking about accidental actions for the most part. Now we talk about deliberate actions. Okay, and so this rule only covers a player's deliberate actions. The rule does not apply to a player's actions to deliberately deflect or stop his or her own ball, or to deliberately alter any physical conditions to affect where the ball might come to rest. That's covered in a different rule. And then it does not include or does not apply to actions that alter the player's conditions affecting the stroke. Okay, and 8.2b, prohibited actions to alter other physical conditions. A player must not deliberately take any actions listed in 8.1a, with the few exceptions that we talked about, to alter any physical conditions, to impact where the player's ball might go or come to rest after his or her next stroke or later stroke, or where the player's ball at rest might go or might come to rest if it moves before the stroke is made. So for example, when a ball is on a steep slope, the player is concerned that it might roll into a bush. So again, this is kind of one of the things that we're talking about here, where the ball is at rest. But if the player, thinks that they might end up 10 feet away underneath the tree, they can't go ahead of time and break the tree branch 10 feet away, even though it doesn't impact that stroke. If they're deliberately trying to improve their potential next stroke, and they're going to be there's going to be an issue with that. However, and we talked about this before, any actions to take care for the course, there's no penalty if the players alters any such other physical conditions to care for the course, such as smoothing footprints in a bunker or replacing a divot in a divot hole. So if they're doing those kind of stuff or actions away from the ball that might impact future shots, again, it's not a problem if they're doing it to care for the course. So a good example of this is if I'm in a 20-yard bunker and I grab my rake and I'm walking up 10 feet to see where the lip is and get an idea, and then I take the rake with me, and then on my way back I rake it. As long as if I'm doing that solely to care for the course, there's no issue. If I'm doing that because I think that I might chunk my ball and end up in the sand and I don't want to be in my footprints, then that's a different issue. And as Mick said before, a lot of times the shot matters as well. If I'm hitting a fairway bunker shot and iron 150 yards away, you know, I'm not really going to get penalized for that. Whereas if I was greenside, you know, you might I say that always, but there might be more intent there to purposely rake the sand in that case. All right, so in 8.3 talks about when a player's deliberate actions to alter physical conditions affect another player's ball at rest or a stroke to be made. And so this is kind of more just an etiquette type thing, but it's still covered here. And it's, you know, obviously we don't want players, you know, stepping on people's balls on purpose and things like that. So this really just covers that part. It's not, doesn't come into play that much. And again, we won't spend too much time, but it just, you cannot deliberately take any actions to improve or worsen the conditions affecting the stroke of another player. But then again, you have these exceptions that if they're caring for the course, we're okay in that scenario. All right, any questions about Rule 8 before we move on to Rule 9? Okay. All right, Rule 9 is ball played as it lies, or ball at rest, lifted or moved. So again, this covers another central principle of the game of golf: play the ball as it lies. The player's ball comes to rest and is then moved by natural forces, such as wind or water. The player normally must play it from its new spot. There's a few exceptions that we'll talk about. If a ball at rest is lifted or moved by anyone or any outside influence before the stroke is made, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. Players should take care when near any ball at rest, and a player who causes his or her ball or his opponent's ball to move will normally get a penalty. There's an exception on the putting green for that. And then Rule 9 applies to a ball that's in play at rest on the course and applies both during a round and while play is stopped under Rule 5.7a, which means that play has been suspended. All right, so, you know, we're more often than not going to play the ball where it comes to rest, but there are some exceptions that the rules allow us to play from another place. So if we hit it in the bottom of the pond, the rules of golf allow us to take another ball and put it in play, not have us swim down to the bottom and try to hit it out, right? It's a good thing that we have some of these in place. And then sometimes it allows us to lift a ball and then replace it on its original spot, whether we're checking to see if it's embedded, to identify it. That's an option in some cases. So what to do when the ball moves during a backswing or a stroke? So if a player's ball is at rest, begins moving after the player has begun the stroke or the backswing for a stroke, and the player goes on to make a stroke, the ball must not be replaced, no matter what caused it to move. Instead, the player must play the ball from where it comes to rest after the stroke. If the player caused the ball to move, then we're going to see if we're going to determine that to see if there's a penalty or not. So if in this case here, if the player starts moving, starts to take their backswing, the ball starts moving, they're going to continue to swing and they hit it. There's no problem. They're going to play it from where it comes to rest. But then they may get a penalty if we determine that they caused the ball to move. And we'll cover how we determine how that happens here in a bit. Wrong way. All right, so deciding whether the ball is moved or not. This has changed due to the Dustin Johnson incident at Oakmont. And we now use this concept of known or virtual certainty to determine whether the ball has moved. So if you're in your official's guide on page 340, I believe, it talks about, sorry, this is in the definition of known or virtual certainty. On page 340, it talks about this principle. And when we're talking about it, there's a few scenarios where it comes up. We talk about this when we're dealing with whether the ball moved. We talk about this with the ball is in a certain location in the penalty area and ground under repair. But known or virtual certainty means more than just possible or probable. It means that either there is conclusive evidence that the event in question happened to the player's ball, such as when the player or another witness saw it happen, or although there is a very small degree of doubt, all reasonably available information shows that it is at least 95% likely that the event in question happened. Okay, so we see this 95%. We talk about that a lot. When you're talking to players, a lot, it's a good way for that I try to do to quantify it as is tell them that, well, if you hit the shot 20 times, 19 of them have to come out this way. So, and then it also talks about all reasonably available information, includes all information the player knows and all other information he or she can get with reasonable effort and without unreasonable delay. So we might consider factors such as information from spectators. When we're talking about whether a ball moved, we might consider current weather conditions. If it's windy or not makes a difference on whether the ball may or may not have moved. Whether if the ball was on an uphill, downhill, side hill lie makes a difference as well. And then the type of grass that the ball is in as well, whether it's fairway, rough, that makes a difference as well. So we're going to gather all this information as much as we can to determine whether it's moved. But again, we're using this concept of known or virtual certainty to determine if it's moved or not. Okay, so if the ball might have moved, but it's not known or virtually certain, then we're going to treat it as not having moved, and it must be played as it lied. Okay, if the ball, when a player's ball at rest has moved, it must be decided what caused it to move, and then this would determine whether the player must replace the ball or play it as it lies, and then also whether there's a penalty. So if the player caused the ball to move, we're going to move the ball back where it was. And if they don't cause it to move, then we're typically going to play it from the new spot, but there are one instance where we wouldn't. So when we're talking about whether the ball moves, there's 4 possible causes. Natural forces such as wind or water, the player may have caused it, including the player's caddy, the opponent in match play, or an outside influence, which includes any other player or spectator or something like that. It's that one there. All right, so then we're using this standard, and we're gathering all information to determine. So we'll break it down and look at a few of these scenarios here. So if we're talking about ball moved by natural forces, if natural forces such as wind or water cause a ball player to move, there's no penalty. And the ball must be played from its new spot. Okay, however, this one exception that we talk about with the ball moved by natural forces is, I believe it was Brooks Koepka's situation that happened at the Masters in 2015 or 2014. But on the putting green, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in Rule 13.1. But on the putting green, if a player has, if the ball has been marked and lifted, then moves because of natural reasons, we would put it back on that spot. But normally, if it moves because of natural forces, we're just going to play it from where it comes to rest. And hopefully, maybe you can hear this. Sounds like my neighbors are doing some pounding, putting up some artwork or something like that in their room. So apologize for that if you can hear that background noise. Okay, so if the ball is lifted or moved by the player, we're going to put it back, right? So we're always going to replace it on its original spot. Just like it says here, if we don't know the exact spot, then we are going to estimate it, and we're going to place it. But anytime that the player causes the ball to move, it's always important that we put it back, because if we don't get it back in that right spot, then we're going to have a penalty in that case. So we got to move it back. Okay, and then 9.4b talks about deliberately touching the ball or causing it to move. So if a player deliberately touches or lifts the ball, the player is going to get a one-stroke penalty. So some of these situations can just be as simple. I think this happened, I think it was recently to John Rahm, maybe. He picked his ball up without marking it. I think it was him, wasn't it? But that's an example of how someone would get a one-stroke penalty for deliberately touching their ball. However, there's no penalty when a player lifts the ball or causes it to move under a rule that allows the ball to be lifted and then replaced, and they do it in the proper manner, or requires a ball to be removed or replaced on its original spot, or it requires or allows the player to drop or place the ball again, or to play from a different place. And then there's two exceptions here. We talked about accidental movement before a ball is found. We talked about that if we're searching for a ball and it's moved, we're going to be able to move that back, no penalty. And then same thing on the putting green. There's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move on the putting green, no matter how it happens. Okay, and then the last exception here is a lot of exceptions. Accidental movement anywhere except on a putting green while applying the rules. So there's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move anywhere except on the putting green while taking reasonable actions to mark the spot of the ball when allowed to do under the rules, remove an immovable obstruction, restore worsened conditions, or take relief under a rule, including determining whether relief is available, and then also measuring as well. So see this a lot of times too. You might be measuring out two club lengths from a certain spot. You're taking a unplayable, and you're taking 2 club length from where the ball is, and when you're laying out your club, the grip hits the ball. That's okay. You're measuring in that case. There's no penalty there. All right, if a ball is lifted or moved by an opponent in match play, we're going to see that that again, this again is match play. And in this case, we're going to have a one-stroke penalty if a ball is moved by an opponent in match play. But there are a few exceptions. There's not going to be any penalty if it's in the act of conceding a stroke or doing it to concede a stroke or the match or the hole. And then also if the opponent lifts or moves the ball at the player's request, that's not a problem as well. Okay, and then same thing with again touching the player's ball and moving it again. There's some exceptions. There's no penalty when we're conceding the next stroke at the player's request. Also marking or lifting a player's ball on a putting green by mistake. If you accidentally marked the wrong ball, you're not going to get a one-stroke penalty for that, provided that it was accidental. And then some of the same exceptions that we talked about for the player, when accidentally causing the ball to move, same deal. So if you're searching for a ball, you're not going to, and you move your opponent's ball, you're not going to get a one-stroke penalty in that case.
Hi, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Just clarify. I think I know the answer, but just clarify. A player is out in the fairway, taking a couple of practice swings, nicks his ball accidentally with the club. They replace the ball. Is there a penalty?
Yep. So practice swing in the fairway, right?
You're right.
Yeah. So practice swing in the fairway. They weren't intending to hit the ball, so it's not a stroke. But they did move the ball when they can. So they're going to get a one-stroke penalty, provided that they put the ball back where it was in play. If they don't put it back, then they're going to get a two-stroke penalty for playing from the wrong place. But they wouldn't get that additional one-stroke penalty for moving the ball.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kyle,
Yeah.
along the same lines, in the fairway, a player's over his ball, getting prepared for his stroke with his club behind the ball. If he touches the ball and it moves, but he continues with his swing, is that considered one stroke or two strokes? With the new double stroke or double hit rule.
Okay, so if you're talking like a double hit, yeah. So a double hit is now just one shot.
Whether the ball, usually when you think of a double hit, you think of the ball's already in the air and you hit it again. Or if
Right.
it's on the ground and if you touch it and it moves, but you continue with the stroke, is that considered a double hit too?
Talking about addressing the ball.
Yeah, I think that's more like, so I guess it would just so let's say that in your little trigger to get your ball or to get your swing started, you do a little forward press and you push the ball forward. And
Right,
then
you see that a lot. People do a forward press. Mhm.
And then you keep your swing. I would say that that would be the kind of that one situation we talked about early on, I think in rule 9, maybe rule 8, where if the ball's moving, you're gonna get there's not gonna be the need to replay the stroke, but you're gonna get a penalty for causing your ball to move, and then you're gonna play the ball from where it comes to rest. So in that case, you would get a penalty.
Okay, just for clarification, that's what I thought. That's the way I would have ruled it
Yep.
too. Thanks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, and then the last situation that we're going to talk about here in Rule 9 is a ball that's been lifted or moved by an outside influence. So again, an outside influence could be another player, it could be a spectator, it could be a dog, it could be a lot of different things. But if it's known or virtually certain that an outside influence, including another player and stroke player, another ball, lifted or moved the player's ball, there is no penalty, and the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if not known must be estimated. So this applies whether or not the player's ball has been found. So the most common example of this is on a par 3 where you have a first player hits on the green, the next player hits, and their shot hits that ball that was already on the green and ricochets it. We're going to get that ball, the first ball, player A's ball, back where it was, and then the other ball that ricocheted is going to be played from where it came to rest. Okay, so that happens quite a bit, and in a lot of times we don't know that exact spot. So in that case, we're going to estimate the spot and place the ball there. Okay, but we run into this situation too, where you have a player that drives the ball like I do, so they miss left and right. And when they do miss left and right, they don't miss by just 5 yards, they miss by like 30 yards. So they hit it into the other fairway. And of course, there's another group that's coming down, and I go out there and I can't find my ball in the fairway. And of course, it was that group that was driving by that picked up my ball. It wasn't that it could have been a million other places. They definitely picked it up. Well, if I know for certain, or if like it says here, if I have known or virtual certainty that they did pick it up, then I would be able to place it and play on. But in most of these scenarios where your ball's hitting the other fairways, you don't have known or virtual certainty, and in that case, you're going to have to go back to where you last played and play under stroke and distance. All right, any questions about Rule 9?
Yeah, you got a chat question.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Ball goes into the penalty area. Flow carries it OB. Where do you play from? That's a good question. Do you know the answer, Dan? I'd have to look that up to see if. But
You
go
have
ahead.
a place to play from because you have a drop from the penalty area.
Right.
But the language here says, if it's moved by natural forces, you play it from where it comes to rest, and that's one of the options that the question gives you.
Okay.
Kyle,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
falls under the ball moving in water scenario.
Okay.
If you retrieve it before it gets OB, then you're taking a penalty area drop. Or you can wait until it goes OB and get your stroke and distance. I don't know why you would, because in either case you could use stroke or distance, but that's the rule that governs that.
Okay. So in that case, so what we're saying is that if the ball was to flow out of bounds, we would have to play stroke and distance. Is that correct?
If it's out of bounds when you decide to make the call on what to do.
Right.
If you take penalty relief before it goes out of bounds, then you have the other penalty area rules to govern it.
Okay.
One of them being stroke and distance, but you have other options.
Sure.
Would you have to remove the ball from the water before it goes out of bounds, or can you simply say verbally, I'm going to take penalty relief?
Good question. I don't know that answer. My guess would be you don't have to retrieve it.
Correct. Yeah, you wouldn't be required to retrieve it in that case.
Great. Good example.
Would you take your relief if you're taking a lateral drop then from the point where it last crossed the penalty area then?
If that's the relief you choose.
Yep. Yeah, we're at last cross that red line. If you were taking the lateral 2 club lengths, if you pick that option, that's the point you would use for that.
This is Chris. I'd like to expand on the ball is and of course, other than the putting green, you take a practice swing, you accidentally nick the ball is not retrievable. Can you substitute a ball to put back in place?
So sorry, where was it, Chris? Where did it happen again?
Okay, no, we're not on the putting green. So we were before talking about fairway.
Right.
And you take a practice swing, you nick the ball, and it goes into a penalty area and it is unretrievable. Can you substitute a ball? Or now you're going to get a penalty for substituting a ball when you're not allowed to?
That's
No,
a
you
good
can go ahead. You
Yeah.
can go ahead and replace that ball with another ball, just the one stroke for moving the ball.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question there. So is it generally I'm trying to find it in here. Is generally the rule of thumb that you're able to substitute except in well, I don't know. I think didn't they clean that up, Marv, or right?
If the ball's not retrievable within a few seconds, you're able to substitute without penalty.
Right. Okay.
If it's accidental.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I
Right.
thought. It had to be accident. Yeah. Because like if I chucked a ball, if I got angry and just chucked a ball in the pond, that would be okay. Right. Yeah. So it's all it depends on if it's accidental or deliberate. Yep.
Well, that was the situation we talked about, where she actually nicked the ball.
Correct. Yep. Yep. All right. And there was a question about what if it is in temporary water. So we're talking about temporary water in terms of the
Yeah, that was my question, Kyle. It's Joe Bolter.
Yeah.
If there's heavy rainfall and you hit it into temporary water that is running off the edge of the course, you hit it into that temporary water, you see it in there, but you can't reach it because it's too far into that big puddle of water, and the water is flowing off the course, then it goes out of bounds. Is that free relief from temporary water, or is it go out of bounds and you have to, it's the rub of the green and you just go back and take stroke and distance? That's my question.
Okay. I would imagine that would be the similar principle in terms of it just depends on when when you get there and when you decide to take relief. If your
Excuse
ball
me, Kyle.
Yeah.
I have an issue with that. Okay, I can't find anything in the rule, but if your ball is not at rest, your stroke isn't over, right?
I think there's a Steve mentioned the interpretation 18.2A2/1, so we can pull that one up. Page 258.
John, I understand your concern, but I'm not sure that applies. I mean, for example, your ball doesn't have to be at rest in water to take a stroke at it. You can strike your ball if it's moving in water if you choose to do so. You don't have to allow it to come to rest. So I see your point. I'm not exactly sure the same scenario applies in the case of waiting for the ball to come to rest before it moves out of bounds in that case or not.
Check rule 11.2B. That's where the movement in temporary water is.
Great.
Kyle, I think you're right. It's pretty clear on page 258. If a ball is moved out of bounds by flow of water, whether it's temporary or penalty, then you have to take stroke or distance.
Right. Yep.
pretty clear there.
Mhm. Okay, and then, yeah, Liz, your point about the exception to ball moving in water there. There's,
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, Kyle. It's clear there.
Yep. All right, appreciate it. Good questions.
Kyle, a question again, just to
Yeah.
clarify this. If you hit a ball into a lateral hazard and it's in water and it's traveling down the creek, and even though the ball is moving, does the player have the option to take relief while that ball asks for relief, even though that ball is still moving? Can I say I'm going to take lateral relief as it's still going down the stream?
I don't know. I mean, I would think yes, but as long, I mean, it's a difference between the ball moving and the stream causing the ball to move. I don't know if anyone else knows the exact spot to reference in this case, but I believe that the answer to your question is yes, that you would be able to take your penalty area relief in that case.
Okay.
I don't agree, Kyle.
Okay.
That interpretation 18.2A 2.1,
Mm-hmm.
that's why that's a tricky quiz question.
So basically what you're saying is that the flow, we would need to determine where the ball ends up in that case. Is that what you're saying?
Especially because the interpretation says must.
Mm-hmm.
We have another rule that allows you to make a stroke at that ball moving in water.
Right.
But as far as the relief area, if the natural force carries it OB,
Mm-hmm.
stroke and distance.
Right. All right. Well, we'll do some more research on this. I don't want to get bogged up as I've never seen this happen. That doesn't mean that doesn't happen because it obviously happens in this book.
Where are we playing where this could happen? We ought to take a GoFundMe for building a dam.
The ninth hole on the Galleon course at Shipyard has a stream that cuts through the middle of the fairway. That when it's after a rain or that, it's flowing pretty quick, and it goes into a lagoon, and the lagoon is clearly marked as out of bounds.
Where
It
is
could-
this?
It's in Shipyard on Hilton Head.
Well, that's why we only are referring to the Golf Association of Michigan.
I think the more appropriate course where this stuff happens is the 19th hole at Pirates Cove. But let's move on. We'll look into it because it's a good question that I think we want to know the answer to. So let's just finish up rule 9 here. So if a ball marker is lifted or moved, we have the same thing here where if a player's ball marker is lifted or moved in any way, including by natural forces before the ball is replaced, the player must either replace the ball in its original spot or place a ball marker to mark that original spot and then put the ball back there. And then the player or his opponent lifts the player's ball marker or causes it to move. The player gets a 1-stroke penalty there. Okay, but in the same exceptions, if it's accidental, when that happens. All right, any questions about rule 9? Looks like there was one more chat that came in. All right. let's, we want to go into Rule 10 or we want to do a quiz? I think people like quizzes.
Quiz.
Quiz. All right. For those of you too, I think but the quizzes, if you go to the USGA website and you go to under the USGA.org and then under playing, there's rules, and then you can go to education here, and that'll take you to the quizzes here. All right, so we'll do 10 questions, course advanced. All right, let me zoom in here really quick so people can see a little better. All right, a player's tee shot on par 3 hole landed on the putting green, then rolled back into a yellow penalty area that was between the tee area and the putting green. The player may, under penalty of 1 stroke, deem the ball unplayable and drop a ball on the putting green. Under penalty of 1 stroke, drop a ball on the putting green, provided that the point is within 2 club lengths of and not nearer the hole, and the point where the original ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area. Under a penalty of 1 stroke, drop the ball anywhere along the player's line of flight prior to where it last crossed the edge of the penalty area, or without penalty, play the ball as it lies.
Well, you can always play the ball as it lies.
Unless it's out of bounds, but we're not out of bounds in this case. So, yep.
Yeah.
That's correct. So really so we can't deem a ball unplayable because it's in a penalty area. So that's one of the exceptions. You can't take an unplayable in a penalty area. Because it's a yellow penalty area, you don't get the 2 club length option. And you can't go along the line of flight. Remember, it's where we last cross in the flag stick as far back as we want, but we have to we have to go to the other side. In this case, we have to go to the tee side of the water to drop when we're taking line back. All right, one of the following is defined as advice: asking an opponent which direction the hole goes, telling another player that his ball is 157 yards from the hole, asking an opponent which club he just hit on a par 3 after both players have teed off and their balls are on the putting green. A player's caddy telling another player's caddy that another player is standing too close to the ball on his chip shots, even if the other player's caddy does not inform his player about what he's told.
Last one.
Last one.
I think we had this one in a previous quiz. All right, in which of the following circumstances should the committee disqualify a player? Before making a stroke, the player moves the tee marker. I think we had this one too. Jeez. All right. Before making a stroke, the player moves the tee marker to give himself somewhere to stand for the stroke. A player lifts the tee marker before playing a stroke from the tee area for no apparent reason and then replaces it. After playing a stroke from the tee area, in order to assist the players behind him, a player moves the tee marker because he believes they are too close together.
3.
Oh. Yeah. The player must be mad at Mick for setting the tees. Mick likes to put them really close together. He's not here, so I can say that. Well, for those of you that do set tees, typically, since we're bringing it up, tees should normally be paced 6 paces apart. On par 3s, we like to give them a little bit more room, so 7 paces apart on par 3s are usually recommended. During a match, player A believes he is entitled to relief without penalty from an out-of-bounds fence. Without saying anything to his opponent, player B, A lifts his ball, drops it within 1 club length from the nearest point that gives complete relief from the fence, and plays it. B sees A do this and feels that A was not entitled to relief, but says nothing at the time. What can B do about this? Ignore the possible breach by A. Tell A that he wasn't permitted to do what he did, but he will ignore it this time. Before A or B, tees off on the next tee, he can request a ruling, either A or C.
Number 4.
A or C.
Okay. Okay, and foursomes, stroke play. So foursomes, again, alternate shot. Which of the following is correct regarding order of play? If A plays when it's B's turn to play, the stroke counts and the side is penalized 2 strokes. If A purposely misses the ball with his stroke, it's now B's turn to play. When starting the hole, A tees off from outside the teeing area, it's now B's turn to play. If A accidentally touches their ball and it moves, it's still his turn to play.
The last one.
The last.
Yeah, I think D. Yeah, D.
D.
Mhm.
Okay. Why do we think it's D?
It was an accidental touching. I think I remember reading that in the book.
He hasn't made a stroke.
It made a stroke, right?
Penalty strokes do not affect the order of play.
Right. Yep. So
Yep,
penalty
yep.
strokes don't affect. So we're going to move the ball back where it was, and then A is going to play.
Right.
Yep. The putting green is all ground of the hole being played, which is specifically prepared for putting within 20 yards of the hole, and not in a bunker. Cut to fringe height or less.
A.
A.
Yep. After teeing off on the first hole of a stroke play competition with his 3-wood, a player realizes that he forgot to adjust the weights on his driver to his preferred setting. Before teeing off on the second hole, he adjusts the weight of the driver. But before he tees off, his actions are questioned. What is the ruling? So again, he did not tee off.
A, he's allowed to do that.
No.
So since he has not made a stroke with the driver, he was entitled to adjust the weight with no penalty before using it.
I don't think so.
Since he did not make a stroke with the driver after adjusting weight, he may change the driver back to its configuration at the start of the round with no penalty. They continue.
That's B.
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 A
Yep.
lot of support for that one.
Yep. B.
So the reason that it's not A is that he has to adjust it back to where it was at the start.
Right.
He's not going to get penalized, but he does have to adjust it back. And because he hasn't played a stroke, he's not going to get penalized. And if he's not going to get penalized 2 strokes, he's definitely not going to get DQ'd. All right, in stroke play, a player's tee shot is known. It seems like we had like every single one of these questions before.
Yeah, it does seem.
Right? Yeah, I think we had this exact same question last week.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
A.
And I was gonna brag about getting better score than Craig when I was leading this, and now I can't take any credit because it's all the same questions. Gosh. All right. Maybe is this one different here? In stroke play, a player's ball, guys? No, same.
Same one, yeah.
And let's see. It's not found. Same one. All right.
Yeah.
What a bummer.
Oh well.
The USGA is getting an angry email from us about this. There was a Chris Bennett sent me a question, and I wanted to talk about that. I didn't get to watch the front nine, but I don't know if Chris, if you're still on the call, if you want to talk about what you had mentioned in terms of marking the desert as
Right.
penalty
Yes,
area.
I was just curious. I noticed that on hole 3 and 5 during the waste management tournament, they marked the waste area in front of those greens all the way across the hole, the fairway hole, with red paint. And I was just curious what their purpose was for doing that. Does anybody have an idea?
My guess would be that it gave the players more penalty drop options.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that with the and this might be just relatively recent too, because some of these areas that we could not define as lateral water hazards before, penalty areas, we can include now. So I know that a lot of organizations like the Tour, like the GAM, have been a little bit more liberal in terms of using those areas to define. And a lot of it, like John said, just comes down to giving players more options. Pace of play is a concern.
Okay, well, thank you for discussing it.
Yeah, that would be my guess. I don't. It's been like 6 or 7 years since I've been there, so I can't remember the whole exactly. But I can't recall that it being marked that way when I was there 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, an interesting aside, Kyle, is that I'm in Arizona and very few golf clubs are using penalty area designations on their desert spots.
Right.
Which they've just decided. And I think a lot of the club members don't like it because it suppresses their handicaps.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point for sure. I know every time I go to Arizona, I have my desert club, my 4-iron that I carry with me. The one I don't care if I snap in half or break on a rock. So yeah, I can see why people would rather take those high numbers out of those numbers and take a drop. All right. Well, I think that's our 2 hours for today. So appreciate everyone's time, and we will next week we will get into Lee. We'll cover rules 5 and 6, and I'm sure he'll have a quiz, and hopefully we'll get a different one for you guys next week. So appreciate your time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.
Kyle, do we know when the uniforms, volunteer uniforms are going to be?
So I know we're working on that. I don't believe they're quite ready, but I believe that I think we just recently finalized a deal for that for our